So yesterday we started with the oncogenes, and we said when we have a gain of function mutation of a proto-oncogene, it becomes converted to an oncogene, and that will increase the incidence of cancer. And we said a wholly linked one allele of that mutated oncogene for malignancy to develop. But if it's a tumor suppressor gene, you need both alleles of that mutation to be present. For example, let's say that we are looking at oncogene that's located in chromosome 16. An individual will inherit two forms of chromosome 16, one from the mother, one from the father. So if somebody inherits a mutated oncogene on chromosome 16 from his father, even though the same gene from the mother's chromosome 16 is normal, the person will develop cancer in as much that gene is coding for an oncogene. But if it's a tumor suppressor gene, if the person inherits a mutated um, tumor suppressor gene from chromosome 16 of the father, if that of the mother is normal, the person will not develop the condition until that normal one in the mother is knocked off. So you have to have both alleles present for a tumor suppressor gene to cause cancer. So what are the oncogenes that we have? For us to call something oncogene, it means that when you have gain of function mutation of that gene, and that gene is excessively expressed, it is overworking, it will cause cancer. That's an oncogene. But if you need to take out a gene, you need to knock it off, you need to delete it before you can get cancer. That means that stuff is likely to be a tumor suppressor gene. So you need to knock off a tumor suppressor gene so that you won't have anything to suppress tumor growth. And there's increased tendency of having tumor growth. That's the difference between the two of them. So all these things we are seeing on the screen right now, they are oncogenes. So they need to be constitutively expressed for tumor to develop. And we said the typical stimulus for growth starts from the growth factor stimulating the growth factor receptor, then the growth factor receptor activating some downstream molecules like signaling molecule. An example is RAS. Then the RAS activating some transcription factors, then transcription factors activating protein that can facilitate growth. So we are starting with the receptor, the growth factor receptor, and we mentioned four particular receptors: ALK, epidermal growth factor receptor, human epidermal growth factor receptor, and the RET. We said these four, they have receptor tyrosine kinase activity. There's a tyrosine kinase activity in their receptor. So once all these receptors are activated by any stimulus, maybe a growth factor, we are going to have cross-linking of those receptors. They are going to dimerize. They form dimers. Very important stuff. You can see it in questions. Once you activate a receptor tyrosine kinase, it will dimerize. When it dimerizes, they couple together. The tyrosine kinase activity will be activated, and you have addition of phosphate to the tyrosine residues within the cytoplasmic subunit of that receptor. So that's the tyrosine kinase activity. Adding phosphate to tyrosine residue. When that happens, there's activation of a downstream molecule, which is likely to be a signaling protein like RAS. Then RAS activates transcription factor release on protein that can facilitate growth. So if you have overexpression of the growth factor receptor, there's high tendency of growth happening uncontrolled. So we mentioned this for ALK, EGFR, HER, and RET. So we said ALK and EGFR, they are like the same thing. ALK, adenoma, lung adenocarcinoma rather, lung adenocarcinoma from just taking the name backwards, ALK, LA, so lung adenocarcinoma. And we said it's very related to epidermal growth factor receptor that is also expressed in the lung cancers. So both of them can be implicated in causing lung adenocarcinoma. There's overexpression of these two genes in someone that has a lung adenocarcinoma. And we said HER2 is also a receptor that has this tyrosine kinase activity, but it is predominantly expressed in the breast. So someone that has breast cancer most likely has overexpression of this HER2 gene, which also codes for a receptor tyrosine kinase. Then the last one is RET. So we said if we mention the RET, we should just remember two things: the neck and the abdomen. What in the neck? Medullary thyroid cancer. What in the abdomen? Pheochromocytoma. And both of them are component of MEN2A and MEN2B. MEN2A, MEN2B. We said for MEN1, that one is menin, and menin is the tumor suppressor gene. So you need to suppress expression of menin for MEN1 to develop. But because RET is the one for MEN2A and MEN2B, and they are oncogene, it means that the presence of this RET has to be increased. You have to have increased activity of this RET because it will drive growth. It's an oncogene. So you want to remember medullary thyroid carcinoma, pheochromocytoma for RET. Then we said we can have some proteins that are not particularly receptors. They are just located in the cytosol, and they have tyrosine kinase activity too. So call them the non-receptor tyrosine kinase protein. An example of that is when you have a chromosomal rearrangement coding for a fusion protein. So if you have rearrangement of uh, genes like BCR and ABL, by the time we are doing hematology, this one will make a lot of sense to us. So someone has BCR ABL rearrangement from chromosome 9. So this BCR is on chromosome 9, ABL is on chromosome 22. So when you have BCR ABL rearrangement, you are going to form this protein complex that we call Philadelphia chromosome. So that Philadelphia chromosome codes for a protein that has cytoplasmic or non-receptor tyrosine kinase activity. And because of the fact that it typically occurs in the white blood cells, so as well as the white blood cells majorly, so it can be implicated in driving some myeloid cells into uncontrolled cell division, like the myeloid cells, including the neutrophils, the eosinophils, the basophils. They can be proliferating uncontrollably, and they can develop CML. It can also be responsible for why ALL, which is acute lymphoblastic leukemia, can develop. So this is going to make sense to us very well when we start doing hematology. But if you can remember it now, it makes a lot of sense. So BCR ABL rearrangement will form Philadelphia chromosome, and that gene product codes for a protein that has non-receptor tyrosine kinase activity that will lead to uncontrolled proliferation. But what are the malignant type that it causes? The chronic myeloid leukemia and the acute lymphoblastic leukemia. So CML and ALL. It is predominantly known for CML. In fact, if a CML patient has this rearrangement, you do your analysis and you're able to identify this translocation, you are happy because there are drugs that can take care of this guy, drugs like the imatinib and the likes. But if someone has a ALL and the cause of that ALL is due to this gene arrangement, the prognosis is bad. So don't forget those two: CML, ALL for BCR, ABL rearrangement. Then the next one, which has this non-receptor tyrosine kinase activity, is a JAK2. So I've said it before that once we make mention of this non-receptor tyrosine kinase, we want to remember all the hematopoietic cells, the blood cells. It will be confined majorly to the blood cells, like the BCR ABL talking about the CML and ALL, JAK2 talking about myeloproliferative neoplasms. Yeah, like precisely uh polycythemia vera. That was the one we mentioned yesterday, polycythemia vera. So JAK2 is also a protein that has this non-receptor tyrosine kinase activity that can be activating all the downstream signaling pathway, transition factors, and all those things that will later start the growth process. But the malignancy or the myeloproliferative disorder that are implicated with respect to this JAK2 is polycythemia vera, the essential thrombocythemia. But remembering polycythemia vera is okay for JAK2, polycythemia vera, BCR-ABL, CML. Then BRAF. So we said it that yesterday. What you just need to remember for BRAF as also a gene that codes for a serine or tyrosine kinase is melanoma and hairy cell leukemia. So those are the two that are very important for BRAF mutation. So melanoma and hairy cell leukemia for BRAF. c-KIT. So this c-KIT receptor is expressed in the stomach, the gastrointestinal interstitial cells of Kajal that drives contraction of the stomach as well as the mast cells. So that is why it can cause GIST. So GIST is gastrointestinal stromal tumor, GIST. And because of the fact that you have these c-KIT receptors on the mast cells, it can also be implicated in causing systemic mastocytosis. So c-KIT is for GIST as well as the mastocytosis. Then we talked about the transition factors now. But before we talked about transition factor yesterday, we mentioned a signaling molecule which is a RAS. So we said RAS is known for activating transition factor, and we said RAS has a GTPase activity, that is, it cleaves GTP. So there are two states that the RAS protein can exist. So it can be activated and it can be inactivated. So for the activated stage, RAS is coupled to GTP. So when RAS wants to switch off itself, it's going to employ its GTPase activity and it's going to cleave off that GTP, converting it to GDP. So by the time GDP binds to RAS, it becomes inactivated. So it makes sense for us to say that if we want to um, inactivate RAS, we'll make it bind to GDP. If we want to keep it activated, make it bind to GTP. So it means that we can actually employ that GTPase activity. Some cancers can employ those GTPase activity to drive malignancy. So what they will do is just shut up that GDPR activity so that it doesn't get the GTP cleaved to GDP. So by the time that happens, you have uh, a lot of GTP rather existing, coupling to the RAS and keeping it active. So that's one of the ways by which some cancers work, like neurofibroma type 1. That's the way it works. It inhibits that GD-based activity. So there's a lot of GTP existing, activating the RAS and driving mutation. So instead of also talking about that, why not just increase the existing RAS molecule itself? Just increase the population of RAS by causing this KRAS mutation. So if someone has a KRAS mutation, there's abundant RAS in circulation. So that can drive some particular cancers, and we make mention of the PLC. Most importantly, the colorectal cancer. The PLC is the acronym, then which means the colorectal, the lung, pancreas. So PLC, pancreatic, L, lung, and the C, colorectal. So we might actually need to sit down with this table and focus on the important things to note. Then the last one is the BCL2. So we said BCL2 is an anti-apoptotic molecule that inhibits apoptosis. So if somebody has a lot of BCL2 in them, taking us back to the apoptotic pathway, BCL2 and the BCL-XL, both of them, they inhibit apoptosis. They don't allow cells to die. So the cancer cells want to use that one to their own advantage by overexpressing BCL2. So when they overexpress BCL2, they don't die by apoptosis. So they will exist for a long time. And that is the basis of the follicular lymphoma and the diffuse B-cell lymphoma. So for example, someone that has the follicular lymphoma, there's a translocation between chromosome 14 and chromosome 18. So that occurs within the B cells. So those B cells contain that chromosome 14, 18 translocation, and the chromosome 18 is the one that is coding for the BCL2 gene, while the chromosome 4 is coding for the heavy chain of the beta of the immunoglobulin produced by the B cells. So it means that once there's that translocation, the BCL2 becomes constitutively expressed. So there's a lot of BCL2 and those B cells do not die. So there is follicular B cell. The same thing happens for diffuse B cell. It's just that it is not the heavy chain that the translocation is happening at for. That one is affecting chromosome 11, while follicular is chromosome 14. Both of them have the common chromosome that the translocation is starting from, which is chromosome 18. So one is 1118, the other one is 1418. So 1418, 1118, and the 18 that is common to them is what is coding for the BCL2. Yeah, so they talked about the tumor suppressor gene, that whenever we have loss of function mutation with tumor suppressor gene, when we say loss of function, we have lost the function of that gene. And what is the function of that gene? Tumor suppressing. They should suppress tumor. So if you have a loss of function mutation of the tumor suppressor gene, so that means that there's no way they can suppress tumor again. Tumor will happen. And we said there are two ways by which they can occur. Sorry, they occur typically by the two hypothesis in which they have to inherit both alleles. Is that they inherit both alleles or they inherit one and the other one is knocked off. But both of the alleles in the chromosomes from the mother, from the father must be defective for the tumor suppressor genes to be inactive. Both alleles must be defective. Unlike in oncogene, you only need to inherit one defective allele. But in tumor suppressor gene, both allele that they are getting from the parent are abnormal. So the person will develop the condition. So what are the examples of this tumor suppressor gene? We talked about APC. That APC is known as the adenomatous polyposis coli gene. That is a negative regulator of beta catenin. So beta catenin WANT pathway drives growth. So you want to suppress growth as a tumor suppressor gene by knocking off the beta catenin. So it means that if somebody has a loss of function mutation in APC and APC is not existing, there's nothing to knock off the beta catenin, and the beta catenin goes to town and cause malignancy. And they are notorious for causing colorectal CA from the name adenomatous polyposis coli. So colorectal cancer. Then the BRCA2 and the BRCA1 gene are also tumor suppressor gene because they help to repair DNA. So if they repair DNA that is damaged, that is mutated, they don't allow it to undergo a malignant transformation to cause cancer. So that's why they are tumor suppressor gene. They help with DNA repair. So if somebody has a loss of function mutation of BRCA1 and 2, it means that there's nothing to repair damaged DNA. They start accumulating mutation, and once that mutation affects an oncogene, it will lead to uncontrolled proliferation. And it is very, very much implicated in the BRCA, the breast and the ovarian cancer. Very important we remember those two. Then we said there's CDKN2A. This CDKN2A codes for P16. And we said P16 is one of the regulators of the G1 to S phase. G1 to S phase. So if P16 is active, it doesn't allow the cell to progress to G1 to S phase. So there's no way the cell can replicate. So it makes sense for us to knock off CDKN so that the cells can continue replicating. That's one of the mechanisms of cancer developing. Knock off CD2A, there's nothing to give rise to P16. There's nothing to block projection from G1 to S phase. There's uncontrolled proliferation. So CDK malignancy is not very high. They will not. It's very rare for them to be asking what malignancy I share with CDK. But it's fine if you want to remember. Then just take note of melanoma, the lung, the pancreatic CA. So yeah, but it's not very high. But we can try to remember the way it works, because there's tendency that they will mention it and they can say that okay, it causes a malignancy. How does it do it? That's the typical way they can ask it. But because of the fact that it can be implicated in so many malignancy, so I don't think it's realistic for them to be asking for the malignancy exactly that CD. No, but they can ask for the mechanism, because the mechanism is just one thing. So P16 inhibiting G1 to S phase progression. Then we also have another tumor suppressor gene, the DCC, deleted in colorectal cancer gene. It's one of those genes that triggers apoptosis, just like DPC, deleted in pancreatic cancer. So both of them can cause, DCC can cause colorectal, DPC can cause both pancreatic and colorectal. So both of them are involved in triggering apoptosis, so that cells that are abnormal can die. So it means that any tumor that acquires deletion of this DCC and DPD, they cannot undergo apoptosis. They will live forever and they develop into cancer. Then we talked about the MEN1, which is different from the MEN2A, MEN2B. We said MEN2A, MEN2B, those ones are shared with uh uh what's it called? The parathyroid malignancy. We didn't mention that. We talked about the medullary carcinoma as well as the pheochromocytoma for the MEN2A, MEN2B. Then we said for MEN1, it's and those ones rather they are shared with an oncogene. But for MEN1, it's due to a problem with menin, and menin is a tumor suppressor gene. So if somebody, and menin has so many roles, one of the role of menin is just working like CDK2A. So it can also express P16 and block G1 to S phase progression and blocks G1 to S phase projection. So someone that doesn't have MEN1 gene, maybe it's deleted and they cannot code for this menin protein, there's no way they can also produce P16 to block G1-S phase. So that means that you have uncontrolled progression of the cells to G1-S phase and they start replicating abnormally. That is the part of physiology for the MEN1. Don't forget that. For MEN1, the menin, MEN2A, MEN2B, pheochromocytoma, and the medullary carcinoma of the thyroid due to RET mutation. But these guys, they are due to menin. NF1, neofibromin, just like I've explained initially, that neofibromin, it's like a RAS GTPase activating protein. So it stimulates this GTPase enzyme of RAS so that we can inactivate RAS. By the time you cleave off the GDP, you have GDP left and the RAS will be inactivated. So it makes sense for us to now say that when there's a deletion of NF1 and there's nothing to inactivate this GTPase, it means that GTP will be free to combine with RAS and to become excessively stimulated. Then there's NF2, which is Melin. Melin is just acting like a protein that helps to prevent growth by inducing contact inhibition, just like icadiarin. So it makes those cells stay together, and when they stay together, they contactly inhibit themselves so that they don't grow. But once there's deficiency of that Melin gene and there's nothing to initiate that contact, you have loss of contact inhibition and you have uncontrolled proliferation of the cells. Then we talked about the P10. Just want to remember PTEN. So EN is endometrial, the P is for the prostate, then the breast. So that's that about the P10. It's also a negative regulator of the PI3K, the AKT pathway. So that this pathway is a mitotic pathway that stimulates growth. So the P10 inhibits it. So if P10 is out, there's nothing to inhibit that pathway. It leads to uncontrolled division. Then there's the retinoblastoma protein that is involved in causing retinoblastoma and osteosarcoma, just like we said yesterday. I want to remember osteosarcoma first. And retinoblastoma is a protein that inhibits G1-S phase progression, just like P16. So if there's loss of retinoblastoma, there's nothing to inhibit the E12 factor, and E12 factor just goes to the cell to promote G1-S phase progression. So that's the mechanism for retinoblastoma tumor as well as osteosarcoma of the bone. Then we also talk about T53, that this one is important for apoptosis. Yeah, so it triggers apoptosis and it also controls this G1-S phase progression. So T53 can uh, inhibit apoptosis. It can stimulate apoptosis rather. It can stimulate apoptosis by activating the BAC and the PAX gene. So any tumor that has suppression of T53 will not undergo apoptosis. They will live for life. That's one mechanism. And that mechanism is that T3 normally activates P21 so that they can block G1-S phase progression, just like P16. So it means that someone that has no P53, there's no activation of P21, and there's uncontrolled progression to the G1-S phase. I would say the cancer that is associated with T53 mutation, which is called the Li-Fraumeni syndrome. They are called the Sabla. So S standing for the sarcoma, B for the breast and the brain, L for the lung and the leukemia, and the A for the adrenal. Sabla. S sarcoma, B brain and the breast, L for the lung and leukemia, and A for the adrenal. Sabla, brain and the breast. They are very close together. So, the brain, the next thing is the breast. So not brain and bone. Just look up brain, then the breast, then the lungs and leukemia. Then we also have the hematine and the tuberin that are shared with tuberous sclerosis. So these guys also inhibit the mitotic pathway. So when they are off, because they fuse together, hematine and tuberin fuse together to both inhibit mitosis. So when they are off, there's uncontrolled cell division and to lead to tuberous sclerosis, which we are going to talk about in neuro later. Then there's also WHL, which inhibits hypoxia-inducing factor. So hypoxia-inducing factor normally stimulates angiogenesis. So it means that if somebody has problem with VHL, it means that hypoxia-inducing factor will be present and it can stimulate angiogenesis and it can cause so many uh, vascular tumors like hemangioblastoma. So those are the things that are component of this von Hippel-Lindau disease. You have so many hemangioblastomas there and the other disease that we are going to talk about when we get to neuro. Then WT1 is also a tumor suppressor gene, and the name is just Wilms tumor 1 gene. So Wilms tumor, and Wilms tumor is known as nephroblastoma. So when there's deletion of WT1, there's Wilms tumor. Then we talk about the carcinogens and and what it causes. So I said aflatoxin is present in these stored grains and nuts, and they are produced by aspergillus. So if we store grains and nuts for a long time, they can get contaminated with the aspergillus, and the aspergillus will grow and they will release the aflatoxin, and this aflatoxin can initiate hepatocellular carcinoma of the liver. Alkylating agents typically cause blood cancer, so they cause DNA cross-linking. So if somebody is using alkylating agent like cyclophosphamide, they are type of chemotherapy agent. So they cause cross-linking of DNA and they are implicated in causing cancer of the blood, like leukemia and lymphoma. Then we said aromatic amines, we always want to remember the bladder for aromatic amines. So maybe from smoke inhalation or from textile. So if we see in the question that they are talking about somebody working in a textile, in a dye company, we want to remember transitional cell carcinoma of the bladder in response to smoke or exposure to dyes, because they contain these aromatic amines like benzidine and 2-naphthylamine. So 2-naphthylamine is in smoke, benzidine is in dye, and both of them can trigger cancer of the bladder. So that is very high for cancer of the bladder. Once you are not seeing dye, you are looking out for smoke, and it typically occurs in people that are advanced in age. Arsenic, arsenic. Um, Arsenic, we said it can be from three sources, like people that are exposed to herbicide, people that smelt metals, or people that are performing these wood. So those are those chemicals that they use to preserve those woods contain arsenic. So for example, if somebody is a farmer and is using herbicides, uh, that herbicide can stain or can contaminate the skin, and from there they can develop arsenic exposure, which can drive squamous cell carcinoma of the skin. So people that are working with all these metals and arsenic is released from those smelts and it can be inhaled, it can cause lung cancer. Then we said arsenic is also one of the causes of hepatic angiosarcoma of the liver, just like polyvinyl chloride. So with respect to hepatic angiosarcoma, I want to remember two things: arsenic and polyvinyl chloride. Arsenic and polyvinyl chloride, yeah. So all these carcinogens might involve in some little memorization, but I feel that the more we look at them, the more we'll get used to them. So we need to be able to familiarize ourselves with this carcinogen, because they are even going to be continuously tested in our step 2. So these are not things that we can just ignore. We need to familiarize ourselves with them very well. So asbestos, asbestos can come from people that are building houses. Roofing materials contain asbestos. Shipyard workers, so shipbuilding materials contain asbestos. Then the third one we said was people that work with automobiles, so mechanics. Mechanics can also get exposed to asbestos because the engine oil, that brake pad, contains asbestos. So from there, they can develop lung problems. So asbestos typically cause lung issues only. So it can cause bronchogenic carcinoma of the lung as well as mesothelioma. So mesothelioma is when there is malignancy of the epithelium of the pleural cavity. So malignancy of the epithelium of the pleural cavity is mesothelioma. So epithelium of the lung is bronchogenic carcinoma. Asbestos is the only cause of mesothelioma, but majority of the cancer that comes from asbestos is bronchogenic carcinoma. We need to be able to separate that distinction. Very important. Tobacco smoke. So tobacco smoke can cause cancer of almost all the tracts from the mouth downwards. From the mouth downwards. But there are three structures that are different from the oropharyngeal tract, the gastrointestinal tract that is not part of that mouth continuation, that the smoke can still cause cancer. So those three ones include the pancreas, the kidney, and the bladder. So the pancreas, the kidney, the bladder, the pancreas, the kidney, those are the separate ones. So bladder, pancreas, kidney, very high yield for smoking. So smoking can, especially kidney, renal cancer. People that smoke can develop renal cancer. People that smoke can develop bladder cancer, both the squamous and the transitional cell type. So transitional cell carcinoma, squamous cell carcinoma of the bladder can come from smoking. Pancreatic carcinoma, adenocarcinoma can come from smoking. Um, Renal cell carcinoma can come from smoking. Then if you take everything from up to down, so smokers can develop cancer of the oropharynx. That's the starting part. Then from there, it can go into the airway, cause squamous cell carcinoma of the larynx. Then uh, from the oropharynx, you can also enter the esophagus. So we know that the oropharynx leads to two parts: the voice box, then the esophagus at the back. So it can cause esophageal cancer too, squamous cell carcinoma of the esophagus or esophageal adenocarcinoma. So from the larynx, it can go to the lung and cause squamous cell and small cell carcinoma of the lung. And we said it that people that don't smoke and they develop lung cancer, most likely that lung cancer is going to be the lung adenocarcinoma type and not the squamous cell or the small cell carcinoma type. So I think then lastly, we want to remember cervical cancer. So squamous cell carcinoma of the cervix, smoke is very, very important in causing that. Ethanol can cause, alcohol can cause liver. Liver is very important for alcohol. Then I also gave us a situation of someone that is taking too much alcohol that had developed esophageal cancer. So they can have squamous cell carcinoma of the esophagus from taking too much ethanol. Liver problem can also start from there. From consumption of too much ethanol, they can develop hepatocellular carcinoma. Very, very important. People that are exposed to ionizing radiation get cancer from two major tissues that are radiosensitive. So blood and the thyroid. So they can have papillary thyroid carcinoma, the papillary type, and also leukemia. Then nickel, chromium, beryllium, silica from people that are exposed to all those chemicals from their work. Either they are working in sandblasting area, they are working in foundries, they are working in mine, or they are working in places that they build aircraft, particularly people that get exposed to beryllium. So those guys can get berylliosis from exposure to beryllium. People that work in areas where they build the aircraft. So people that work in foundries or sandblasting area or mines, they can get exposed to silica. So people that work in places where they smelt metals, they can have exposure to nickel and chromium. So all of them can cause lung issues only. Lung issues only. So they can cause lung cancer. So lung cancer. Then radon is another one like that. It can cause lung cancer only too. In fact, it's even the second most common cause of lung cancer after smoke, after tobacco. It's very important we remember that. Not nickel, chromium, beryllium of silica, but radon. And it comes from radioactive decay. Then we also talked about nitrosamines that we get from smoked food. And we said this is very common among the Japanese. So they develop uh, gastric cancer, the intestinal tract, from consumption of so many nitrosamines from their smoked food. Then we said vinyl chloride, just like arsenic, both of them can cause hepatic angiosarcoma. So there's tumor of the endothelial cells of the vessel supplying the liver, hepatic angiosarcoma, which is metastatic. And vinyl chloride is typically one of the components of the PCV pipes, so polyvinyl chloride pipes. So from all those water, so water running through those pipes, if somebody is drinking that water directly, the person can get exposed to vinyl chloride and can develop hepatic angiosarcoma. So that's where we stopped. So today we start with the concept of feed cancerization. So feed cancerization is just a terminology that's just talking about um, malignancy developing in different evolutionary stages. So there's exposure to a particular feed to carcinogen. Let's say that somebody's bladder get exposed to dye at once. So maybe the person took in dye, the dye got filtered in the kidneys and it was able to travel down to the bladder. We'll start noticing that all those cells making up those bladder epithelium are going to start undergoing that malignant transformation. But it's going to take a process. They don't start at once. So some will start now, the other one will start later. So You just see some normal areas surrounded by pre-malignant cells, and those pre-malignant cells will be progressing to cancer gradually. So when you notice that, okay, zone A is having cancer, and later you check again, zone B start developing cancer too. That is field cancerization. So what I just want us to take home there is that it is not due to metastasis. It is not one tumor metastasizing to another area. It is not that tumor from zone A is metastasizing to zone B. That is why we are seeing new cancers in zone B. No, it is due to independent development of those malignant transformation, because that field is exposed to those malignant carcinogen at the same time, but they start growing into those malignant changes at different rates. So it's very, very common with head and neck cancers. So head and neck cancer that get exposed to smokers or smoking rather, or people that develop skin cancer from exposure to UV, or bladder cancer. So you just notice that one zone is developing, another one is developing subsequently. Some might think it's metastasis. No, it is not due to metastasis. It is due to the concept of field cancerization. So they typically talk about this field cancerization with respect to the head and neck cancer. Very, very important we remember that. So we don't fall for the trap of metastasis, because you are going to see metastasis in the option. Please don't pick metastasis. It is due to independent development of those malignancy. So cell A are undergoing their own malignant change. Cell B undergoing their own. Cell D, but in different stages. So that is about field cancerization. A field getting exposed to carcinogen, and they are developing their own malignant change at different rates. So what are the oncogenic microbes? So they are oncogenic microbes, that is microbes that are capable of causing cancer. We have a lot of them. So we are just going to talk about them. Epstein-Barr typically affects B cells. So Epstein-Barr binds to CD21. So we know that from our immunology, B cells contain three receptors that are, very peculiar to them: 19, 20, 21. So this Epstein-Barr likes the 21. So it binds to the CD21 and stay latent in the B cells, causing some malignant transformation. So it can cause Burkitt lymphoma. Yes, so it can cause Burkitt lymphoma from triggering the chromosome 814 translocation, chromosome 28 translocation, or 822, anyone. The three of them can cause the malignant transformation of those B cells, and they start replicating abnormally. It can also cause Hodgkin lymphoma. So Burkitt lymphoma is a form of non-Hodgkin lymphoma. Why Hodgkin lymphoma is different from Burkitt lymphoma? So the name is just based on some particular cells that you see when you do your histology. So when we see the Rinsterbach cell from our cytology, you know that this is likely to be an Hodgkin lymphoma. So our Epstein-Barr can also drive the B cells to undergo those malignant change, and they develop Hodgkin lymphoma with the presence of the Rinsterbach cell. Epstein-Barr is also implicated in causing that. Epstein-Barr is notorious for causing neopharyngeal carcinoma. In fact, I think Epstein-Barr is the only agent that we know for now that is a microbe that causes nasopharyngeal carcinoma. Once you see nasopharyngeal carcinoma, somebody having a mass within their nasopharynx, causing dysphagia, causing difficulty in breathing, causing hoarseness of voice, blocking the oscillation tube, causing recurrent otitis media. You know that this is nasopharyngeal carcinoma until otherwise proven. And the implicating microbe is Epstein-Barr. Then the fourth one is primary CNS lymphoma. There are B cells in the brain, although they are not very much, but there are still some little B cells in the brain that can get infected from this Epstein-Barr, undergo malignant transformation, and they can form a mass in the CNS. So one way they like asking this primary CNS lymphoma, that is primary one. Primary CNS lymphoma is when somebody that is immunosuppressed, maybe the person has HIV, and the person is having encephalopathy, the person is having convulsion, seizures, focal deficit, and all those things. And we did a brain CT and brain MRI CT imaging, and we're able to see a single ring enhancing lesion, a single focus of ring enhancing lesion. It's likely to be a primary CNS lymphoma. So single ring enhancing lesion that is not multiple. We want to suspect number one primary CNS lymphoma, particularly if the person is immunosuppressed from HIV. So it can allow HPV to come in or reactivate from its latent stage in the B cells and cause abnormal proliferation of the B cells in the brain and lead to primary CNS lymphoma. So for Epstein-Barr, I want to remember 4 basic pathologies. Burkitt lymphoma, number 1. Number 2, because Burkitt lymphoma is a non-Hodgkin, you want to remember the Hodgkin, then nasopharyngeal carcinoma, then primary CNS lymphoma, Epstein-Barr. Then hepatitis B and C, we're already familiar with these guys. They are the only ones that can cause chronic infection of the liver, so they can progress from the chronic hepatitis to liver cirrhosis through hepatocellular carcinoma. We have explained that. So I have explained how the progression can happen. So this is just the link. So hepatitis B and C can cause hepatocellular carcinoma from that progression. Human herpes virus 8, that's a Kaposi sarcoma virus. It can cause Kaposi sarcoma. So once you see HHV8, one thing that comes to your mind is Kaposi sarcoma. This guy is sexually transmitted. That virus is sexually transmitted, and the individual will develop Kaposi sarcoma of the skin. Kaposi sarcoma can occur in 3 major regions: the lungs, the GI, and the skin. So if they have it in the skin, they typically have this purple colored rash, like nodules in their skin. So it is just a tumor of the lymphatics, so the endothelium of the lymphatics having malignant transformation. That is Kaposi sarcoma. So it's very important we remember that. Purplish lesion in someone that is immunosuppressed, you want to think of human herpes virus 8, which is Kaposi sarcoma. Particularly people that have HIV, is one of those 8 defining illness, Kaposi sarcoma. So by the time the CD4 count starts going less than 500, they can have this guy. By the time it gets to 200, it becomes more disseminated. So it can now go to the lungs, can go to the GI, not only the skin. So another one is human papilloma virus, particularly the serotype 16 and 18. Those are the ones that can cause the cancer. Because of the fact that this guy is sexually transmitted, human papilloma virus is sexually transmitted, it can cause cervical cancer for the females and penile cancer for the males. So for people that practice anal sex, they can have anal carcinoma from this human papilloma virus. And for people that practice oral anal sex too, they can have head and neck cancer. So human papilloma virus can cause cervical cancer, it can cause penile cancer, it can cause anal cancer, as well as oropharyngeal cancer. Human papilloma virus. And all of them are squamous cell cancer. All of them, they are squamous cell cancer. We want to remember the serotype for human papilloma virus. Serotype 16 and 18. 16 and 18. Those are the ones that cause cancer. 16 and 18. Cancer. 16 and 18. Then another organism is H. pylori. I know that this you might find this one surprising. H. pylori can cause cancer. Yes, because we even said it that H. pylori can cause chronic atrophic gastritis of the stomach because it can evade the host response. So it can stay for a long time in the stomach and be causing chronic inflammation. And we've said that chronic inflammation is a fertile ground for metaplasia to happen, or dysplasia, or anyone. So this H. pylori causing chronic gastritis can further lead to intestinal metaplasia of the epithelium of the stomach. So from there, they can go to gastric adenocarcinoma. Then because of the fact that there are some mucosa in the body that contains lymphoid tissue that we call mucosal shell lymphoid tissue. This Helicobacter pylori and those lymphoid tissue are very, very much, they are very abundant in the mucosa of the stomach. So because of the chronic inflammatory damage that this guy causes to the stomach, it can trigger lymphoproliferative proliferation or lymphoproliferative change rather of those lymphoid organs within the mucosa of the stomach, causing mucosa associated lymphoid tissue lymphoma. So we should not forget that H. pylori can cause Mott lymphoma as well as gastric adenocarcinoma. Both of them actually occur in the setting of background chronic gastritis. Human T lymphocytic virus 1 is responsible for causing adult T cell leukemia or lymphoma. Once you see that the T cells are proliferating abnormally, you want to think about this guy. So this guy is also belonging to the same family as HIV. Both of them are retroviruses. They have reverse transcription activity. So the human T cell, just from the name T cell, it predominantly affects the T cell. So you just notice abnormal proliferation of the T cell in the blood. Adult T cell leukemia, human T lymphocytic or T lymphotropic virus is responsible for that. So aside those viruses, what about the parasite? Liver fluke, clonotric sinensis. It can stay within the bile duct because it likes staying in areas that has bile. So it can irritate the common bile duct and trigger progression from metaplasia. It can progress to cancer. So the irritation will lead to metaplasia. Then from there they can develop cholangiocarcinoma, which is tumor of the common bile duct. So we expect this person to be presented with obstructive jaundice. Then the last parasite is the Schistosoma hematobium. Schistosoma hematobium is like a schistosomal strain or species rather that can infect the bladder. The other ones infect the GI. So they cause different things. The Schistosoma hematobium will cause chronic irritation of the epithelium of the bladder, and it will lead to squamous cell metaplasia, which will now develop a squamous cell cancer at the end of the day. So you will not expect Schistosoma hematobium to be causing transitional cell cancer of the bladder. No, it will cause squamous cell squamous cell carcinoma of the bladder. So let's start again. Epstein-Barr, 4 things you want to remember: a non-Hodgkin lymphoma, particularly Burkitt lymphoma, Hodgkin lymphoma itself, nasopharyngeal, and the primary CNS lymphoma. Hepatitis B and C, hepatocellular carcinoma. Human herpes virus type 8, that's the one that we call the Kaposi sarcoma virus, causes Kaposi sarcoma. Human papilloma virus is sexually transmitted, so can cause cervical, and it is the one that is implicated in all cases of cervical cancer. Cervical cancer typically is driven by the human papilloma virus, so can be sexually transmitted to the guy, and they can have the males can develop penile squamous cell carcinoma. People that practice oral or anal sex, they can develop anal carcinoma as well as oropharyngeal carcinoma. H. pylori can also cause gastric adenocarcinoma as well as the mold lymphoma of the stomach. Human T lymphotropic virus can cause T cell leukemia, so adult T cell leukemia or lymphoma. Then I talked about the liver fluke, which likes staying where there is bile, so it can cause tumor of the common bile duct, which is cholangiocarcinoma. Then schistosoma hematobium stays in the bladder, irritation of the bladder wall, squamous epithelium. So it will change the bladder epithelium from transitional to squamous cell. So that's a metaplastic change. Then from there, they can progress to squamous cell cancer. So what are things that will call the serum tumor markers? So tumor markers are just some factors, some proteins that we assay for in order to assess response of tumors to chemotherapy treatment or radiotherapy treatment or whatever treatment that we are offering, as well as to check for recurrence. We don't use them to make diagnosis, or we don't use them to screen, because there are so many non-neoplastic conditions that can raise these tumor markers. So that's why we don't use them as a basis for diagnosis. But you can use it to monitor treatment. You can use it to assess recurrence, that okay, this tumor has gone, we have treated it. If you measure that tumor marker, if there's no recurrence, you don't expect it to be high. But once you have treated the cancer and you measure the tumor marker and it's high again, it means that there's likely to be a recurrence. So what are these markers? We'll talk about them one by one. The first one is alkaline phosphatase. Alkaline phosphatase is more like an enzyme that is elevated in 4 major structures: the liver, the bone, the placenta, and then the intestine. Let's ignore the intestine, it's not important for now. So the liver, the bone, the placenta, those three are very important. So we have a placenta form of the alkaline phosphatase, we have the bone form and the liver form. So it makes sense for us to say that someone that has hepatitis, someone that has obstruction of the common bile duct affecting the liver, they can all have uh, elevation of the alkaline phosphatase. So predominantly, alkaline phosphatase is very, very elevated when there's cholestasis, when there is obstruction of the extrahepatic duct. So, of the liver, you have alkaline phosphatase increase. So, that's from the liver. Then, because of the fact that it's also produced on the bone, anybody that has any condition that is causing increased synthesis of bone, either from remodeling or from cancer or anything, they will have elevated alkaline phosphatase. And we said it that there are some malignancy that are osteoblastic. Once they get to the bone, they will synthesize new bones within, within that bone that they are attaching to. Paradoxically, it doesn't still make that bone strong. It can collapse. It can still undergo pathologic fracture. But they are just osteoblastic in nature. They try to produce more bone. So because of that increased synthetic activity, you have more activity of alkaline phosphatase and is elevated. So bone metastasis that is osteoblastic have elevated alkaline phosphatase. People with liver issues, particularly cholestasis, they have elevated alkaline phosphate. Then the placenta one. So yeah, so for the bone, aside metastasis, Paget disease of the bone too is important because Paget disease can occur in different phases. We have the osteoblastic, the mixed, and the osteolytic phase. So if we catch Paget disease at the osteoblastic phase, we can have elevated alkaline phosphatase because at that stage they are building more bone before they now start collapsing those bone at the osteolytic phase. We are going to talk about Paget disease in our musculoskeletal section. Then the last one that can elevate alkaline phosphatase is seminoma. So seminoma are testicular germ cell tumor that have placenta-like activity. Yes. So they can synthesize almost all the hormones from the placenta like HCG. That is why someone that has seminoma, HCG is elevated. Yes. And another thing that's elevated is called PLAP. So placental alkaline phosphatase is elevated in them too. So once you see PLAP, placenta alkaline phosphatase and HCG, one of the differential should be seminoma. Seminoma. So you want to rule out liver issues, bone issues, as well as the seminoma for the PLAP. And yeah, so there's another thing with regards to this alkaline phosphatase. So if we really want to be sure that this elevated alkaline phosphatase that we are seeing is due to the liver issue, we want to combine that assay of that alkaline phosphatase with GGT level. So if it's due to cholestasis, GGT will be elevated. So if there's elevated ALP, but there's normal GGT, it's not likely to come from the liver. So we want to look elsewhere. Is it coming from the placenta, maybe from a seminoma stuff, or is it coming from the bone? Is that a Paget disease or a bone metastasis? Alpha fetoprotein is another marker that we check for. Alpha fetoprotein is a protein that is produced from the yolk sac and the liver. So it makes sense for someone that has a hepatocellular carcinoma to have elevated AFP. Yes, hepatocellular carcinoma, they have elevated AFP. And it also makes sense for someone that has a yolk sac tumor. So I know that it might be very difficult to understand these things now because we have not even talked about these tumors. So that is why me particularly I don't like the arrangement of this um ending of this pathology because it makes it very difficult to, but we are just still going to talk about them, so that we can just have that faint idea. So by the time we are also seeing them in our respective sections, we can remember them too. So alpha fetoprotein produced from the liver and the yolk sac. So liver, that's why it's elevated in hepatocellular carcinoma. It's produced from the yolk sac in the baby, and that is why it can be elevated in someone that has a yolk sac tumor. Another name for a yolk sac tumor is endodermal sinus tumor. Yes. So it can also be elevated in someone that has a mixed germ cell tumor. Mixed germ cell tumor means any tumor that is more than two. So it's either somebody has a yolk sac tumor and seminoma, or someone has an embryoma, maybe a choriocarcinoma of the germ cell and uh, endodermal sinus. So you just have more than two, more than one rather, combination. That's a mix. So for we to say that, for us to say that a mixed germ cell tumor has elevated alpha protein, it's most likely that that mixed germ cell tumor is actually having um, endodermal sinus tumor with it because that's the one that can elaborate alpha protein. Another condition that elaborate alpha fetoprotein is ataxia telangiectasia. This reason is not actually well known. So the way I just learned it is ataxia. There's elevation of alpha fetoprotein with the A, but there's another A that is decreasing. Who knows the A that is decreasing in ataxia telangiectasia? Anybody from immunology? What also decreases in ataxia telangiectasia? Can we remember? So the level of IgA, the level of IgA also decreases in someone that has ataxia telangiectasia. So people that have neural tube defect or abdominal wall defect, so there's opening in the neural cavity and there's opening in the abdominal wall. They can have elevated alpha fetoprotein. Why? Because alpha fetoprotein is produced from the yolk sac. Yes. So by the time there's opening in the brain or there's opening in the abdominal wall, it can find its way into the into the amniotic cavity, and from the amniotic cavity, it can travel to the maternal blood and it will be elevated. So that is why people with neural tube defect and abdominal wall defect like omphalocele or gastroschisis, they all develop elevated AFP. The only condition that alpha fetoprotein is Down syndrome. So HEG or inhibin may be elevated, but alpha fetoprotein is down in someone that has Down syndrome. It's down. It's down. So HEG, you always want to look out for placental issue with respect to HEG elevation. So someone has idatiform mole or cholelcarcinoma. These are neoplastic problems with the placental tissue. So they can have elevated HEG because HEG is an hormone that is produced by the tissue trophoblast of the placenta. So because of that, once you see elevated HEG, you want to think about placental problem. Is this person having a cholelcarcinoma or the person is having idatiform mole? Just like we also mentioned, someone can have a seminoma and the HCG can be elevated because seminoma kind of behave like a placenta. So seminoma would be an example of a testicular cancer that can elevate HCG. So someone that has a mixed germ cell tumor too, that is, the person is having a seminoma with another tumor, they can have elevated HCG. Then I want to talk about the CA. So this CA, the way to just learn it is just picture 15, 19, 125. So when we say 15, breast cancer, 15 breast cancer, 19 pancreatic cancer, 125 epithelial ovarian cancer. So the 1527 is actually with the breast cancer. The CA 199 is the pancreatic cancer. The CA 125 is epithelial ovarian cancer. 1519 125. 1519 125. So they don't typically talk about the 15 for breast cancer, but 125 is very important for epithelial ovarian cancer, very distinct marker for it. And 19 for pancreatic adenocarcinoma. They are elevated in those guys. Calcitonin, of course, is elevated in someone that has medullary thyroid cancer. That's where it's produced. So we call it medullary thyroid cancer because within the medulla of the thyroid, there are the parafollicular cells or the sieve cells that secrete this calcitonin. And we can see medullary thyroid cancer in someone that has MEN2A and MEN2B. In addition to that medullary thyroid cancer, they have pheochromocytoma. And the gene that is implicated in MEN2A and MEN2B is what? Anybody? What's the gene that is mutated in them? Hello?
No, correct.
Hello?
Correct.
Yeah.
Right.
So red. Red.
Hi.
Red. So carcinogene embryonic antigen. Carcinogene embryonic antigen is very specific for, it's not specific rather because there are so many conditions that can cause it. So it can come from colorectal cancer or pancreatic cancer. So most of all those things we'll be talking about today are just stuff that I'll just be learning by heart. So they are quite boring. Yeah. So more like just be learning. So CA antigen is from the colorectal region as well as the pancreatic cancer. So it's not specific because there are so many things that can elevate that level. So chromogranin is another one. Chromogranin. So chromogranin is actually from neuroendocrine tumors. Neuroendocrine tumors are tumors that are shared with neoplastic differentiation of neuroendocrine cells. So those neuroendocrine cells are present in so many tissues. You can see them in the lung, the pancreas, the the pituitary gland, the parathyroid gland, and all those areas. And they typically secrete hormones. If they don't secrete hormones, they secrete neurotransmitters. So someone that has a pheochromocytoma secreting epinephrine, that's a neuroendocrine tumor. So someone that has insulinoma secreting hormone, that's a neuroendocrine tumor. Glucagonoma, because all those areas we have neuroendocrine cells there. So one marker for almost all neuroendocrine tumor is chromogranin. So chromogranin is elevated in almost all of them. So someone has a small cell carcinoma of the lung that's secreting ADH and ACTH. Chromogranin is likely to be positive in that person. So someone has a pheochromocytoma, they can have neurochromogranin. Very important. So neuroendocrine tumors. Tumors are secreting hormones or neurotransmitters, and they typically contain neuroendocrine cells in them. LDH, lactate dehydrogenase, is also a tumor marker. Yes, because um, particularly in someone that has a dysgeminoma. So it has been shown that we don't really know why. I don't know why, but it's typically elevated in someone that has a dysgeminoma. So it is elevated in dysgeminoma of the ovary. The people that have ovarian dysgeminoma can have elevated LDH, and it is also elevated in any testicular equivalent of ovarian dysgeminoma. And the testicular equivalent of ovarian dysgeminoma is a seminoma. So one of the markers for seminoma, in addition to HCG or plaque, is what? LDH. So we can use this LDH measurement to indicate the tumor burden, because the higher the tumor, the more the tumor, the higher this LDH activity. We talked about the Warburg effect yesterday, that they like converting their pyruvate to lactate, and the lactate back to pyruvate. So what they are using is LDH. LDH. So that is why when it is elevated, it's high tendency of the burden of the tumor to be very high. The neuron-specific enolase is just like chromogranin, but it's just that neuron-specific enolase is very, very specific for like 3 tumors. So you can get it from the name NS. So you just add the C in our head. The C is carcinoid tumor. So NS, neuroblastoma, and the S is a small cell carcinoma of the lung. So all of the 3 of them are neuroendocrine tumors, and the marker for them is a neuron specific enolase. Neuron specific enolase. So neuroendocrine tumors, NSC. What are these few many of this acronym? NSC, neuroblastoma, the S, small cell carcinoma, the C, carcinoid tumor. Carcinoid tumor. So we are going to talk about these 3 tumors again. So another one is PSA. PSA, prostate cancer, prostate cancer, PSA, prostate cancer. So prostate cancer, PSA means prostate specific antigen. So it makes sense for us to know that this guy is elevated in someone that has a prostate cancer. It's just that it's not specific because it can be elevated in someone that has a BPH or even common prostatitis. That's why we don't typically use PSA to make diagnosis of cancer. Although there's a level of elevation of this PSA that is in keeping with someone that has a cancer. Yes, but it's not the best thing to do. So you have to do a TROP biopsy. So you have to do a transurethral resection of prostate and analyze what we are dealing with instead of staying with PSA. So there is immunohistochemical stain that we can use also to characterize a tumor that we are confused about, or if we notice that a tumor has metastasized and we want to know where it's coming from, we can just pick those cells and do immunohistochemical stain on them so that we can identify the original source of that tumor. There are so many stains we can check for, so many stains. So we have the chromogranin synaptophysin. So the chromogranin synaptophysin can be expressed in some of those tumors, particularly neuroendocrine tumors. So when we combine these two together, we can specifically make diagnosis of small cell carcinoma of the lung, carcinoid cancer tumor as well as neuroblastoma, just like the NSC we talked about. The reason why we are combining them is that both of them can cause separate cancers. So synaptophysin can be elevated in other cancers, like this one that I listed here, the melanoma, the glioma. It can be elevated in them too. So by the time you are checking for synaptophysin and you are seeing elevated level, and at the same time there's elevation of chromogranin, you know that definitely what is going on is a neuroendocrine tumor. So once you stain for both of them and they are positive, that's likely to be any of this NSC. Then there's another stain that we call cytokeratin stain. So we want to stain for cytokeratin. So any tumor that shows positivity for cytokeratin is most likely from epithelial cells. So we know what we are dealing with, that this guy is actually coming from epithelial cells. So it can be squamous cell carcinoma, it can be pancreatic adenocarcinoma. It's coming from epithelial cell of a particular structure. But that is not very specific enough because we can't nail it precisely, the particular origin. So we need to also start combining with other things so that we can figure out precisely where it's coming from. So another one is desmin. So they can ask us this one, desmin. Desmin is a protein that is and is one of the components of the intermediate filament of muscle. So once we see desmin, we are thinking of muscle. Cytokeratin, epithelial cells. Desmin, muscle. So muscular tumors like rhabdomyosarcoma, they can express desmin. Rhabdomyosarcoma, they show positivity for desmin when we stain them. There's another one we call the glial fibrillary acidic protein. Glial fibrillary acidic protein, it's a very specific marker for astrocytes. Yes, very important, my people, don't forget. Glial fibrillary acidic protein typically stains the glial cells of the nervous system. And the glial cells includes the astrocyte, the Schwann cells, but most importantly, it is the astrocytes. And there are two tumors that can come from the astrocyte, astrocytoma and glioblastoma. Both of them come from astrocyte, and if they are present, they will show positivity of the glial fibrillary acidic protein. So once we hear glial fibrillary acidic protein, we are thinking of any issue with the astrocyte. If there's astrocytoma or there's glioblastoma. Another thing to stain for is neurofilament. So neurofilament can be positive in neurons, not the glial cells of the neurons, but neurons, because typical component of the nervous system include the neurons and their supporting system, which is the glia. So if you have a tumor that's developing from the neuron itself, like neuroblastoma, if you stain that tumor, there's going to be positivity of the neurofilament protein. Yeah. So we talked about that when we were doing neurology too. Then PSA antigen also can be stained in someone that has a prostatic epithelial tumor, so like a prostate cancer. Yes. So it makes sense for us to say that someone that has a prostate cancer now, if we stain for cytokeratin, it's likely to be positive because it's present in epithelial cells. So, but specifically, we want to assay for the PSA. PSA will be very elevated in someone that has a prostate cancer. Then another one is the PECAM. So we know that PECAM is one of those additional molecules that is expressed on the endothelial cells. So it makes sense for us to find this PECAM elevated in vascular tumors like angiosarcoma. And we mentioned that two things can cause angiosarcoma of the liver: polyvinyl chloride and arsenic. S100 is typically present in the neural crest cells. The neural crest cells. So we might not be able to know all those derivatives of the neural crest cells now, but I just want us to remember melanoma and schwannoma, and these three essentially, they are important. So melanoma, schwannoma, they are actually derived from the neural care cells. I tried to put some of them here. ELMOPAS, that's the acronym. We are going to talk about it when we are doing repro. ELMOPAS is the acronym of stuff that are derived from the neural care cells. It might be difficult for us to palm it now, so let's just leave it. We'll study it when we are doing repro. So just to make mention of the ELMOPA. So the E is from the enterochromaffin, the L leptomeninges. So the M is the melanocyte. So that's why melanoma can stain for this S100 because it's one of the derivative of the neural crest. Yeah, so the S is actually the Schwann cell. So schwannoma can show this guy. Then the only one that is there that is not actually coming from the neural crest but still stains for this X100 is Langerhans cell histiocytosis. So this guy is one of the macrophages of the skin. So it has its own typical presentation. We are going to talk about it when we are doing hematology. Langerhans cell histiocytosis. So it stands for S100 as well as CD1A. Yes. So TRAP. We talked about TRAP yesterday. So I said in addition to remembering BRAF, you want to also remember TRAP. Both of them are positive in someone that has early cell leukemia. So TRAP is also known as tartrate resistant acid phosphatase. So people with early cell leukemia overexpress acid phosphatase, and it's been noticed that when you try to degrade that acid phosphatase enzyme by exposing it to tartrate, it becomes resistant to it. So people that have early cell leukemia have possibility of TRAP, tartrate resistant acid phosphatase. Then vermectin is for mesenchymal T use. That's mesenchymal T use. Like, so looking at the ME, endometrial meningioma, this one is not IU. It's not likely they'll be asking us vermectin. So, but most importantly, we can pay attention to TRAP, S100, GFP, desmin, and our chromogranin asymptotic. Yeah, desmin is very high yield. They can ask us desmin. Yes, very, very high yield. So, from experience, desmin can come. So, there's something we call P glycoprotein. So, P glycoprotein is expressed by some tumor cells, and what they do with the P glycoprotein is just to pump out uh, they 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 use the tumor cells use the pig glycoprotein to pump out toxins like chemotherapeutic agents. So it's one of the ways by which the tumors can be resistant to chemotherapy. So once those tumors have upregulated the amount of pig glycoprotein that they have in them, by the time you give that person chemotherapy, the tumors have this pig glycoprotein already inside to pump out those chemotherapy so that they don't get to them. So another name for the pig glycoprotein is the multi-drug resistant protein 1, MDR1. They are also known as a P glycoprotein, and they use ATP to do their action. Yes, so they require ATP for supply before they can pump all those chemotherapy out. So it's not only used for by cancer cells. Some cells of the body also use it to protect themselves from some bacteria rather, to protect themselves against antibiotics. So by the time the antibiotics get in, they're just pumping it out. They're pumping it out. So, but we should remember it for chemotherapy agent now. MDR, MDR1 or pig glycoprotein that pumps out chemotherapeutic toxin, and they are resistant to chemotherapy. Then cachexia. So we
Dr.
talked about
Bali,
cachexia.
please, sorry. Oh, okay.
I'm
I
with you,
just want to
sir.
ask, yeah, yeah, before we move on, please, that Elmo pass, can you just um tell me what the it stands for again so that we don't go too far before
Okay, I
I
think
pull you
I
back? The
so
Elmo pass for the neural crest cells.
yeah, so the MOPAS stands for all the structure that can be derived from the neural crest. So the neural crest can form E. So E there is the enterochromaffin cells of the stomach. So enterochromaffin cells of the stomach. The L is the leptomeninges, which is the brain covering. The M there is the melanocyte of the skin. Uh, O is the odontogenic structure. So structure that form the mouth. I didn't put it there, but P is the PNS ganglia. P is the PNS ganglia. So forming the ganglion, the autonomic nerves, the cranial nerve, those ones are part of the PNS. Then A is the adrenal medulla. S is the Schwann cells. Schwann cells. The last S is the skull bones. So skull bones, the Schwann cells, A adrenal medulla, P PNS derivative, O odontogenic, M melanocytes causing melanoma, L leptomeninges, and E enterochromaffin.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome, Dr. Moravia. So cachexia. weight loss. We used to think catheter as weight loss. Yeah, you are right. It's like weight loss. Someone is looking wasted. Someone is just looking wasted. It's cathetic. So what's the mechanism? We've talked about this when we were talking about some modifications in the early part of pathology. And what is actually driving this is elaboration of some cytokines by the the chronic disease. So if the chronic disease may be from a cancer, from AIDS, from heart failure, from COPD, from any diabetes, anything, those chronic disease typically elaborate some cytokines, which includes TNF alpha, interleukin 1 and 6. So these interleukins suppress appetite. So they don't allow the person to eat. So that's why if somebody doesn't eat, they appear wasted. So because they are not taking a lot of nutrients, they are not taking enough protein, carbs, they have weight loss. So there's weight loss, of course. They cannot metabolize all those substrates to generate energy. They will appear fatigued. And if somebody is having a chronic disease, there's high chance that the person will be bedridden. So if the person is bedridden, the person will not be able to even use his muscles again. So the loss of functional stimulation of the muscle can trigger the apoptotic pathway, yes, to cause resorption of those muscles so that it can lead to atrophy. We remember when we were talking about atrophy, that atrophy is when we have reduction in the size as well as the number. So the mechanism by which atrophy um, is achieved, that is reduction in the number, is from apoptotic destruction. So we label all those cells that want to take care of through the atrophic process, and we take them off by making them undergo apoptosis. So in addition to the fact that we are not using those muscles and they are being labeled for apoptosis, um, these guys are not eating. So the nutritional supply too is there. So there's no more protein to lead to the muscular development and muscular growth and all those things. So the muscle will atrophy, particularly the muscles in the face, those ones in the temporal region, the ones in the neck, and the other part of the body. So all of them are actually due to the TNF interleukin 1 and 6 that is expressed. All of them culminate from majorly the fact that these guys suppress appetite and they don't eat, they have weight loss, they're fatigued, and because of poor nutritional supply, we cannot form a basic muscle protein, there's muscular atrophy. And again, this interleukin can also activate the apoptotic pathway that can cause resorption of these muscles. So they'll be labeled up to die by apoptosis because you need to conserve this energy, this little energy that the body is having. It doesn't want to waste it on some metabolism, some muscle. So just try to reduce the bulk of the cells. So everything culminates from the action of the interleukins from TNF, interleukin 1, 6, appetite suppression. They're not eating very well. They lose their weight. They become fatigued at the end of the day. Then apoptotic cascade are also activated either through the ubiquitin proteasome pathway or through the other pathway. So that is that. So sorry about what I said. That's not entirely correct. So what I'm trying to say is that this interleukin can activate the ubiquitin proteasome pathway so that they can degrade the muscular proteins, or they can also trigger apoptosis separately that will make those cells die. So that they don't constitute stress to be consuming energy. So paraneoplastic syndrome. So paraneoplastic syndrome, we can see them. Yes, we can see them in our exam. Very, very high yield. I believe we cannot know, we might not be able to learn everything, but I we are going to talk more about the most important one. So paraneoplastic syndrome just means somebody having a manifestation, either musculoskeletal, endocrine, hematologic, neurologic, in association with a cancer. So there's a cancer that is causing that change. Yes. So that is like and that change is distant from the cancer. That is a paraneoplastic manifestation. It can it can move across all the systems. So they can have musculoskeletal, cutaneous, paraneoplastic changes. So let's take them one by one. So for the musculoskeletal and cutaneous, the first one is dermatomyositis. So somebody can have ovarian adenocarcinoma and have features of dermatomyositis. And what are those things we are looking out for? So it makes sense. It will really make a lot of sense if we have done these topics, but let's just try to talk about them. So what you are looking for dermatomyositis is progressive proximal muscle weakness. So that person will be having weakness in the hip. The person will having weakness in the shoulder, so they cannot move the shoulder very well. They're having problems climbing upstairs because of hip weakness. In addition to that proximal muscle weakness, they have some typical rash. That is what makes it dermatomyositis and not polymyositis, because someone that has polymyositis can also have this proximal muscle weakness. So by the time you are now seeing this weakness alongside with rash, this is likely to be dermatomyositis. And what is this rash? The Guthrum papule. So we are going to see like rash at the extensor surface of the extremities. We can see the rash. Let me see if I can get an image of that Guthrum papule for us so that we can appreciate what it looks like. So it's believed that that rash is coming from cytokines that is being expressed by that ovarian cancer. So if you are making a diagnosis of dermatomyositis, you might want to what's wrong with the network? Can you guys still hear me? Okay. Hello? Are we still in this meeting? Hello?
We're in the meeting.
Okay. So
Yeah.
so this is the Guthrum papules. You can see this reddish papules in the extensor surface of the fingers. So that's the typical presentation in dermatomyositis. Then they have elytrope rash. So elytrope rash is just like a rash that happens within the face, the sun exposed area of the body, particularly the face. So once you have that rash in the face like that, particularly surrounding the eyelids, and these Guthrum papules at the extensors, particularly at the knuckles and all those areas, you combine that with the proximal weakness, that is dermatomyositis. And it's a paraneoplastic manifestation of someone that has adenocarcinoma, particularly from the ovary. So once you make diagnosis of dermatomyositis, you might want to check if that person actually has a background ovarian cancer. So it's a paraneoplastic manifestation of ovarian cancer. The ovarian cancer is believed to be releasing some cytokines that is causing those vascular changes in those areas of the body, leading to the rash that is manifesting. So acanthosis nigricans is another one, but acanthosis nigricans and signs of Lesser Trella, that is Lesser Trella sign and acanthosis nigricans. Both of them are paraneoplastic manifestation of GI adenocarcinomas. GI adenocarcinoma. Once you see someone that has Lesser Trella sign or acanthosis nigricans, you want to rule out gastric cancer. There's high chance that is gastric cancer. So what is acanthosis nigricans? It's just presence of this hyperpigmented, thick, plaque-looking plaques in the intratuginous area of the body, like the neck and the axilla. So let's look at the way it looks like. Just see it like uh, acanthosis nigricans. So they call it warty plaques. So they are like warty plaques. Yes, in the intratuginous area, like this, in the armpit. This is another one, and this is another one again here. So this hyperpigmentation here that looks like what? That is acanthosis nigricans. So someone that has a GI malignancy, they typically develop. There are so many other conditions that can cause this, but if it's occurring with a cancer, that's a paraneoplastic manifestation. So it's believed to be a result of the cancer elaborating some growth factors. So those epidermal growth factors that has been elaborated by the GI cancers goes to those areas and cause hyperproliferation of the epithelial cells there, which brings about those hyperpigmented plaques. Sign of Lesser Trella or Lesser Trella sign is just meaning conglomeration of so many seborrheic keratosis. So seborrheic keratosis, the way they would describe it, once you just see flat or raised greasy lesion, you know that that is likely to be seborrheic keratosis. It looks like as if it's oily. So, seborrheic keratosis is raised or flat greasy lesion. Particularly, they are commonly found within the back. And let's see if we can see an image that shows seborrheic keratosis, so we can see what it looks like. Okay, so this is one. So they look hyperpigmented, raised. Sometimes they can be flat, greasy lesion. Once you see this and it's occurring in multiple with a cancer, it can be a paraneoplastic manifestation of a cancer. So once you have many seborrheic keratosis happening like that, you call it lesser trailer sign. You want to think of a gastrointestinal cancer. Yes. Then the last one is hypertrophic osteoarthropathy. So hypertrophic osteoarthropathy. This is also what we call the grade 4 or grade 5 finger clubbing. So yes. So it's a paraneoplastic manifestation. You can bring this one in the exam and you just paint scenario of someone that has finger clubbing. There is enlargement, bulbous enlargement of the fingers. There is a trachea, the swelling and redness of that area, and it looks like club. And they are like what they can how can they, there's a way they can say it. So they will just put so many things in the option and they can say this is a paraneoplastic manifestation, this is due to metastasis, this is due to that. You know, you just go for a paraneoplastic, you can see it like that in your exam. It can come. So hypertrophic osteoarthropathy is a paraneoplastic manifestation of lung adenocarcinoma. So this lung adenocarcinoma can elaborate some cytokines that will allow platelet to proliferate in the vasculature of the digit. So when those megakaryocytes proliferate in that area, they trap within those areas, they can release some cytokines that can cause some vascular changes. They can cause some fibrovascular proliferation as well as some bony changes. So because of the cytokines, you will notice that the bone is undergoing some changes and it will appear club. There will be atragia. There's inflammation of the periosteum of the bone. That's what we call the periostosis. So all these things are what will culminate into those claw fingers, and they are very, very common with someone that has a lung adenocarcinoma. So once you see lung adenocarcinoma, we are thinking of finger clubbing. Once you see lacertella signs or acanthosis nigricans, we are thinking of GI malignancy. Once you see dermatomyositis, which is the Guttron pappus as well as the helicobacter in the eye, we are thinking of ovarian adenocarcinoma. Those are paraneoplastic syndromes. Then for the endocrine section, this one is, some of us are very familiar with this. So somebody can have elaboration of parathyroid hormone releasing protein or peptide. This is not the same as parathyroid hormone, but it can act as parathyroid hormone. So that is why it can cause hypercalcemia. So they can paint a scenario of someone that has squamous cell carcinoma of the lung, majorly squamous cell carcinoma of the lung, and they can paint scenario of the person having symptoms of hypercalcemia, maybe abdominal pain, polyuria, and all those things. And the next thing they will ask us is what is the protein that is implicated? They will put PTH in that option. Many people will rush and pick PTH. No, the answer will be PTH releasing peptides. So PTH related, not releasing. PTH related peptide. That is what is elevated. And because of the fact that it can act similarly like PTH, it will elevate the blood calcium level. So it's actually being paraneoplastically produced by those cancers, and it can elevate the blood calcium level. So another one that can produce some hormone is lymphoma. So lymphoma can also cause hypercalcemia, but their own is not due to elaboration of PTH related peptide, but due to increased release of vitamin D3, so calcitriol. And we know that vitamin D3, which is vitamin D, can go to the intestine and absorb calcium and phosphate. It can go to the kidney and do that. It can go to the bone and do that too. There will be hypercalcemia. So if there's hypercalcemia in someone that has lymphoma with lymphadenopathy everywhere, we are thinking of increased vitamin D3 production. If there is increased hypercalcemia from someone that is having um, lung cancer, there's a lung mass, there's um, there's lung mass, and the person is having hypercalcemia, you are thinking of parathyroid hormone releasing peptide. So we should not forget squamous cell carcinoma of the lung typically release parathyroid hormone related peptide. Lymphoma typically increase level of vitamin D3, and both of them will cause hypercalcemia. That's an endocrine paraneoplastic manifestation. So another endocrine paraneoplastic manifestation we can have is Cushing syndrome. So Cushing syndrome, as well as, which is associated with increased level of ACTH and hyponatremia from syndrome of inappropriate secretion of ADH. Both of them can come from small cell carcinoma of the lung. So small cell carcinoma of the lung can both elevate two A's, ACTH and ADH, ACTH and ADH. But squamous cell carcinoma of the lung will elaborate PTRH. So if ACTH is high, ACTH can stimulate the adrenal cortex to release cortisol. When cortisol gets increased, it will lead to Cushing syndrome. So that is going to be explained when we get to endocrine. So ADH2 can be elevated in someone that has a small cell carcinoma, and ADH basically causes reabsorption of water from the kidney. So when water absorption is too much, it can dilute the sodium and they can have hyponatremia. So they have this euvolemic hyponatremia. We're going to talk about it when we get to endocrine too. So it might be a little bit difficult explaining all those things now. So we should just know that small cell carcinoma can elevate two A's, ADH and ACTH. When ACTH becomes high, it can cause Cushing syndrome due to elevation of cortisol. And when ADH becomes high, it can cause increased absorption of water that will dilute the sodium in the blood, causing a form of dilutional hyponatremia. Those are endocrine problems, endocrine paraneoplastic problems. Then the hematologic. So we are thinking of polycythemia for the first one. That's one of the commonest one they can ask. Polycythemia. And the polycythemia is due to any cancer that can elaborate erythropoietin. So erythropoietin is the hormone that they are producing. And what are those tumors that can produce erythropoietin? So just remember the liver and the kidney. So renal cell, the hepatocellular carcinoma, then those ones that contain blood vessels like the hemangioblastomas, they can. So leiomyoma too that cause fibroid, fine. Pheochromocytoma, yes, but the major two that they usually test is the renal cell and the hepatocellular carcinoma. Hepatocellular carcinoma, renal cell carcinoma. Pheochromocytoma is there. Hemangioblastoma, blood vessel related to is there. So there's another one that we call the pure red cell aplasia. So when we are doing immunology, then I know that we talked about some associations that share with thymoma. So maybe we talked about myasthenia gravis, talked about red cell aplasia, we talked about Good syndrome. All those things are associations of thymoma, and they are actually due to paraneoplastic association. They are paraneoplastic associations. So someone that has pure red cell aplasia. So the thymoma is causing release of abnormal self-reactive T lymphocytes. So they will just go to the bone marrow and they'll start destroying the precursor of the red blood cells, that is the reticulocyte, the immature form of the red blood cells. So the reticulocyte count is going to be very low and they will cause anemia. So that's what you call pure red cell aplasia. Aplasia of the red cell, which is associated with reduction in the reticulocyte count. That is red cell aplasia. Not that because someone can have anemia that is not pure red cell. The mature red blood cell will just be low. Reticulocyte count will be normal. But someone that has a red cell aplasia, reticulocyte count is low. They have been damaged by the antibodies from the thymoma. So, or Good syndrome. So Good syndrome is hypogammaglobulinemia. It's actually more encompassing. It's also reducing both the B cells and the T cells. So all those self-reacting antibodies from the thymus, from this thymoma, they can combine with the T cell and the T cell destroy them, and they can cause hypogammaglobulinemia. So there's no immunoglobulin that is produced. That's good syndrome. So hypogammaglobulinemia with thymoma is good syndrome. Anemia with low reticulocytes with thymoma is pure retinal aplasia. So there's another one that they commonly test to this Trossel syndrome. So Trossel syndrome is one of the hematologic paraneoplastic manifestation too, and it's also known as the migrative superficial thrombophlebitis. So in these people, they typically have this migratory rash. So the problem there is that not typical rash, just like having features of thrombophlebitis like pain, redness of a particular part of the skin due to inflammation of the vein. So it moves from one part of the body to another. The reason is because people that have pancreatic CA, they are very prone to developing clots. So pancreatic CA is highly hypercoagulable, so they produce a lot of clots. So because of that, those clots cause inflammation of the veins, causing thrombophlebitis. So they move from one part of the veins to another. So those rash-like lesions will just be moving from one region to another, and also they'll be having redness in different part of the body. It will be painful too. So we call that migratory superficial thrombophlebitis. So it's a paraneoplastic manifestation of pancreatic CA. I'll call it Trossel syndrome. There's another thing that's associated with pancreatic CA again. That's a neoplastic syndrome. That is non-bacterial thrombotic endocarditis. So we call it malantic endocarditis because of the fact that we said it that these guys are highly hypercoagulable. They form a lot of clots. So we are going to notice clot being deposited on the heart valve like someone that has infective endocarditis. But the difference between the septic form is that this one don't have any microbes in there. So if we check that vegetation, we are just going to see fibrin platelet, no microbe. So that is typical for malignancy like pancreatic CA as well as SLE. Yes. So one thing about this kind of endocarditis is you want to be careful of septic of embolization. They can easily dislodge and travel. That's it. Non-bacterial thrombotic endocarditis. Non-bacterial thrombotic endocarditis is a paraneoplastic manifestation of pancreatic CA, all because of the fact that they can form clots. Then we have the neuromuscular forms of those paraneoplastic manifestation, the neuromuscular form. So um, the first one is this anti-NMDA receptor encephalitis. That one is actually with ovarian teratoma. So all these ones, they are just high falutin stuff. They rarely test. If you are going to test, they can test Lambert-Eaton and Myasthenia gravis. Those ones are still common. But all this NMDA stuff, I feel that they are a little bit high falutin, but it's still good we know them. So NMDA receptor is a form of glutamate receptor. Whenever there's obstruction of that receptor, it typically affects the psychiatric component of the body. So they have this psychiatric disturbance, they're hallucinating, they're delusional, they're confused, and all those things. Coupled with some cognitive deficit. So you have problem with memory, they forgetting, they have dementia. They can have language dysfunction, they cannot speak properly because of that cortical affectation. So there's memory deficit, there is language dysfunction, they can have seizures. Sometimes it can affect the peripheral nerve and they can have autonomic instability. It is due to ovarian teratoma elaborating antibodies against this NMDA receptor in the brain. So once you are seeing the person having all these things, there's no paralysis, there's no weakness. We are likely dealing with anti-NMDA receptor encephalitis. So this is encephalitis because almost everything we are seeing here is due to problem with the brain. Yes, encephalitis. So psychiatric problem, hallucination, delusion, memory issues, they can't remember things, language, seizures, NMDA receptor encephalitis. But if you are having all these things and there's limb paralysis, there is poor bladder control, poor bowel control, there's high tendency that especially if that limb paralysis is the lower limbs, there's high tendency that that has gone beyond an encephalitis. It's now an encephalomyelitis. Encephalomyelitis. So someone that has a paraneoplastic encephalomyelitis that we can see here can uh, can present that way. So they will have all these things we have said: psychiatric, memory, language seizures, and all those things. In addition to that, they will having paralysis. So that is not due to antibody against NMDA now, but antibodies against the HU antigens in the neurons. So there are some HU antigens in the neurons of the body. So there are some malignancy that can elaborate some antibodies against those HU antigens, particularly the small cell cancer. So small cell cancer typically produce anti-HU antibody. That's what they express. Once you see anti-HU, small cell cancer. And that is why small cell cancer can cause paraneoplastic encephalomyelitis. All these things we are saying initially with limb paralysis, paraneoplastic encephalomyelitis. So let's go back again. Opsoclonus myoclonus ataxia. So how this person will be presenting is that the person will have opsoclonus, they have their eyes rolling in all axes irregularly, and it's involuntary and it's non-rhythmic. So that's what separates it from vertigo. Vertigo is still rhythmic. Maybe they are taking it horizontally, or they are taking it vertically, or it's pedunculated, or it's rotational. But it will be rhythmic, like it will follow a rhythm. But for opsoclonus is irregular, just like staccato, just scatter, and it doesn't follow a particular pattern. So that's why we call it dancing eyes. Then they can have myoclonus, so they have sudden jerk of their body parts, and their gait is not stable. So they have this ataxic gait, like they are opening their leg widely, and they are trying to catch their steps. So like ataxic. So once you have cluster of those three, that is opsoclonus myoclonus ataxia, and it is commonly seen in someone that has a neuroblastoma. In children or in adult small cell carcinoma of the lung, most of the situations they will ask for this neuroblastoma. But it's good for us to remember that in adults, it will be small cell carcinoma of the lungs. Yes. So these guys are producing some antigens that are destroying some structures, or some interleukins that are destroying some structures in the cerebellum majorly. So that's the reason why they have this opsoclonus myoclonus ataxia syndrome. It's a paraneoplastic manifestation of neuroblastoma and small cell carcinoma of the lung in adults. So there's another one we call the paraneoplastic cerebellar degeneration. Problem with this one is that from the name, three things we are mentioning. Paraneoplastic cerebellar degeneration is caused by three conditions too: small cell cancer, some breast cancers, and Hodgkin lymphoma. So these guys are elaborating antibodies against antigens in the Purkinje cells of the cerebellum. The Purkinje cells are located in the cerebellum. So these cancers are capable of producing some antibodies that can attack these Purkinje antigens. So because we said that small cell cancer is part of them, and we've said it initially that small cell cancer typically elaborate anti-HU antigens. So the antigen one for small cell is anti-HU. Why the one for the breast cancer is just anti-yo. So you got breast milk. So anti-yo yogurt, which is milk from the breast. Then the last one is anti-TR for Hodgkin lymphoma. So those three can elaborate some antibodies that can bind to their corresponding antigens on the Purkinje cells, which include the U antigen, the Yo antigen, the HU or the TR antigen. So the way someone that has a paraneoplastic cerebellar degeneration will present is that they'll just be having cerebellar issues. So people that have done neuro, they can relate now. So they'll be having ataxia, they cannot achieve balance. They will be having diplopia, they can have dysathria, they cannot talk well because you need the cerebral coordination to also help coordinate the speech. Dysathria, diplopia, ataxia, they can have vertigo, not obstructionous now, but vertigo. All those things are in keeping with cerebellar problems. So that is paraneoplastic cerebral degeneration from someone that has these three cancers. Then we've talked about paraneoplastic encephalomyelitis from HU antigen from someone that has a small cell cancer. So in addition to seeing paraneoplastic disturbance, memory, language, seizures, we are going to notice that the person will be having limb paralysis. Encephalomyelitis is affecting both the brain as well as the spinal cord. Small cell carcinoma. Then another thing that is very, very common for small cell carcinoma that they usually have is Lambert-Eaton myasthenic syndrome. So this is due to the fact that the small lung cell is elaborating some antibodies against presynaptic P or Q type calcium channel. Please don't go and pick L type calcium channel. It is PQ type. Antibodies against presynaptic PQ type calcium channel at the neuromuscular junction. That is what is causing the small cell, what is causing the Lambert-Eaton syndrome. So, if those guys have antibodies against that calcium channels, they cannot release calcium, and there's nothing to stimulate the release of neurotransmitters into the muscles to stimulate movement. So that's why they are paralytic. So they have this muscle paralysis, and you can have diplopia, you can have paralysis. They have problem with the reflexes, autonomic symptoms. They have poor erection, orthostatic hypotension, and all those things. So another one that is similar to Lambert-Eaton is myasthenia gravis. This one too is actually with paralysis due to the fact that we cannot have elaboration of neurotransmitter to stimulate the ACTH receptors on the muscular junction. Yes, but this one is not due to affectation of calcium. It's due to the fact that there's antibody that is blocking those acetylcholine receptor at the muscle. So when we are saying neuromuscular junction, we are saying a junction between a nerve and the muscle. So on the nerve, that is where we have the calcium channels. So those calcium channels on the nerve, when they get activated, they will cause the neurotransmitter that are located on the nerve to move and act on acetylcholine receptor, because the neurotransmitter that's leaving the nerve is acetylcholine. So once they leave the nerve, they will act on acetylcholine receptors on the muscle, and they will cause muscular contraction. So in someone that has Lambert-Eaton syndrome, there's antibody against those calcium channels. So there's no calcium release. There's nothing to stimulate release of acetylcholine into the neuromuscular junction to stimulate acetylcholine on the muscle. So there's paralysis. But for someone that has myasthenia gravis, it's not due to calcium release. No. The problem is that the acetylcholine are moving to the muscle across the neuromuscular junction. But the acetylcholine receptor on the muscles, they are occupied by the antibodies, which cause the paralysis. So myasthenia gravis is typically associated with a thymoma, just like someone that has Good syndrome, just like someone that has a pure red cell aplasia. Why Lambert-Eaton is one of those things associated with small cell carcinoma, just like someone that has a paraneoplastic encephalomyelitis. So one of the distinguishing factors for this Lambert-Eaton and myasthenia is that you notice that someone that has the Lambert-Eaton, they have what's it called, autonomic instability, and they have poor reflexes. Their deep tendon reflexes are kind of very slow or even suppressed. Why in myasthenia gravis is typically pure paralysis. They don't have problem with their autonomic system. They don't have any problem with their deep tendon reflexes. It is normal. So I think we are going to stop here, and then we are going to continue from here the next time. So do you have any question? I just want us to try and sit down with this thing and study them very well. We have to study them very well and learn them. So the one that I feel are very important, dermatomyositis is important, acanthosis nigricans very important. Or in fact, all the musculoskeletal, we have to know them. All the endocrine, we can't joke with it. We have to know it. We have to know polycythemia, non-bacterial thrombotic endocarditis. They can test it, as well as Trousseau syndrome. This Good syndrome, I've seen it in only one question. No, sorry, red cell aplasia has one question, but Good syndrome and red cell aplasia is not very high yield. Polycythemia, Trousseau, non-bacterial, very important. Then our Lambert 13 and Myasthenia gravis. Then maybe obstructionals too. Yes. So those are the important ones that I feel that we really need to know before we go for our exams.
I've seen the paraneoplastic cerebellar degeneration in a question two before.
Yeah, one of those U-word questions. Yeah, they will put it. They will put it.
Yeah.
So that is that. So do we have any question? Any area of clarification to shed more light? Okay. So are we saying everything is clear? If I can be free to ask any question. Can I ask us any question?
Yeah.
I have a question.
Okay. Dr. Miriam.
Yes, so the previous slide where you were talking about what's the name of that stuff again? No, please can you scroll up? The field of something.
Field carcerization. Is it this?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. So how would the question appear that would make us know that okay, they're not talking about metastasis?
Yeah. The location. The location. So they notice that the tumor is spreading in the head and the neck. So it's affecting maybe the mouth. Then it's not getting maybe to the back of the mouth towards the throat. So that is likely to be this field. It's not likely to be a metastasis. So the location also helps. Once you see head and neck, majority of the time it will be head and neck that they will put it there. So
Okay, thank you.
it's smoking. Yeah. So in that, just imagine you're having spread. No. It's not common. It's not common. Particularly if it's due to smoking. If it's due to like maybe the person is smoking and all those things. So that smoking is the carcinogen that is exposed, that all the uh tissues or the cells there are getting exposed to. So they can start developing the tumor independently and they will start growing, from time to time. So that is that. So I think I'm going to look for questions tomorrow to just try and justify some of those things that we have talked about so that some things will become more clear to us by the time we are seeing them in questions. So I'll just allow you to go and digest all these things because I know that it's not easy looking at all these things like this for the first time. So it might look very strange, but we should just try to look at them and consolidate them. Yeah. All right. So in the absence of any question, uh, I think we'll meet again tomorrow evening. So just finish the aging and maybe we'll look at some questions too. All right. So bye bye everybody.